Hey guys, this is gameplans. Welcome to another Pokemon trading card game history video. There's only a few sets left before we reach the modern day in terms of history. At this point, we are within a year. This is Temporal Forces, the second of the Paradox sets here. And it's just after a rotation. It has a new regulation mark here, regulation mark H. And it introduces a returning mechanic. They're very pink this time round, A-Spec cards. Can't say I'm a fan of the actual design, I'll be completely blunt about it, but these are some very interesting cards. If you forget what the A-Spec mechanic is, you can only have one A-Spec of any type in your deck. So if you have a Hero's Cape, you are not allowed to have a Master Ball as well, but as a result they tend to be very powerful trainer cards for the most part. But there are actually energy cards here as well. There are no Pokemon for these, it is only trainer energy at the moment, but they are incredibly powerful cards and we will be going over all of them as they release. Not all the A-Specs are actually good, but they are all too good to be allowed at multiple copies per deck. So there is that to go over. This set has a lot of cards which are actually worth it, but not a lot of brand new archetypes per se, so variety wise it's getting kind of difficult at the moment to keep playing different decks that are at tournament level, because most of them are just like adaptations to the old stuff that we've seen. Even after a big rotation here, it's like Charizard became the meta more or less, and everything else just kind of has to play around that. So it's a weird one. There's a lot of very fun cards to talk about though, a lot of cool artworks as always, and yeah, let's just go straight to it because we have quite a few at this stage. There's a lot more playables I think than there normally is to talk about, so that's really cool. Basically all of these cards, or at least some play. There's a couple I think are maybe a bit speculative in here, but for the most part all of these actually did pretty, they did something in tournaments, if not actually being really strong, so that's cool to see. A ton of good cards down here as well. Maybe not all of the trainer cards in this set are amazing, but there are quite a few of them which are, and are definitely worth noting. And then, like I've said before, it is very difficult to evaluate what draft would be like at this point, especially because this is after drafting Paldean Fates, which means we've had the reprint set. There is a very realistic chance that people can play like Charizard Pidgeot, even if it's not at full power at this point. So it is very difficult to really know what is and isn't good, but I think there's a fair few things here which are at least interesting, and so even if it's not a full draft breakdown type thing like I would have had before, I think this is still a good little segment to have down here. We always had the off-meta stuff anyway, but I think this kind of solidifies it. So, without further ado, let's just get cracking in because we have a lot of Paradox Mons to talk about here. Gouging Fire is the first one we're going to speak on here. This is a 230 HP basic ancient Pokemon. It has the reasonable Heat Blast, but it's mostly here for Blaze Blitz. For 2 fire and a colorless, it does a whopping 260 damage, which is absurd for a basic EX to do that much without any sort of discard or that kind of recoil type thing. However, until you move it from the active spot, it cannot use Blaze Blitz again. Feels almost like a future card that is in the ancient pool instead. It has a ton of HP, so you can use this with the booster capsule and get to 290 HP, which is kind of insane, but you do have to switch it afterwards as well. Ancient cards do not have the natural switching outs like the future stuff does, but as its own deck it didn't really do a lot. What it does do though is see play in some Charizard decks, because of course Charizard plays the basic fire energy anyway, and this gives you a higher damage output and honestly arguably bulkier thing than what the Entei can do. Depends on the stipulation obviously, but it's you can use this instead of the Entei if you don't need to play the Forest Sealstone and stuff. And 260 is a ridiculous amount of damage. It one-shots every other basic EX that we have. So, really, really cool. Iron Boulder doesn't see a ton of play, but it did see some play in some future boxes, and maybe Lost Box could tech it if they wanted to. It's a 240 HP basic Pokemon, so it does have that going for it. Weak to Grass is a bit of a collateral hit at the moment because of Charizard, so that's a bit of a shame. Repulsor Axe, I think, is the main attack that tended to get used here. For a fighting in the Colress, it only does 60, but during the opponent's next turn, if they damage this Pokemon, then they have 8 damage counters placed on the attacker, which is kind of fun, but ultimately it's like a worse version of the Dracozolt that we saw before. I'm not really a huge fan, but if you need to hit Miraidon for whatever reason, and you can play some of the damage boosting that future stuff has got right now out of this set, it's not the worst thing that you could do. It does have a second attack as well, but 2 fighting is just too difficult to charge up. Even, you know, accounting for Mirage Gates and stuff, you don't play that much fighting energy, so yeah. The damage buff comes from Iron Crown EX. This is a 220 HP reprint of Deoxys from Gen 5, basically. The Cobalt Command ability allows your future Pokemon that aren't Iron Crown EX to do 20 more damage to the opponent's active Pokemon before applying weakness and resistance. It does have its own attack as well. It's not quite as good as Helix Force, but we'll take it. For a Psychic and 2 colorless, it does 50 to 2 of the opponent's Pokemon, being unaffected by weakness, resistance, or any effects on those Pokemon as well. So this would punch through Safeguard on Mimikyu. Won't one-shot it, unless you have the Future Booster capsule on it, then you could one-shot the active one, right? Yeah, this is very reminiscent of the old Deoxys, where that increased your Plasma Pokemon's damage by 10. This one does by 20 because power creep, obviously. But yeah, this turns stuff like Iron Hands into an absolute menace, right? Because if you get a couple of these down and maybe a Future Booster capsule on it, then you get to do like 180 damage with Ampy very much, which is starting to one-shot stuff like Mew, and that then makes it a lot easier to take the additional prize cut. Very powerful. Raging Bolt mostly needs to wait a set. It does have a couple of small things in this particular set, but it mostly needs to wait until next set before it becomes a real deck. But then, oh boy, does it become a real deck. It's like the best, one of the best decks in the current format. So yeah, keep an eye on this one. 240 HP Dragon type EX. It is a basic, of course, ancient Pokemon as it needs to be. Its burst raw attack is actually okay. For any 1 energy, discard your hand, draw 6 cards. You might need to use that at the start of games and stuff if you have a slightly lackluster setup. That's fine, it's perfectly reasonable. And then for a lightning and a fighting energy, you discard any number of basic energy across your board and do 70 damage for each one discarded. I do remember seeing this and thinking, yeah, this card is going to be kind of nuts, but I don't know if it's going to be good immediately. It has some very painful memories of a couple of other attackers of this ilk that just didn't really see any play, right? Especially because of it being a dragon type. We're thinking things like the Reshiram, for example, but that had other issues that kind of caused it to be pretty bad. This one, the main problem is charging up the exact energy, right? But Sada's Vitality does a really good job of doing that. It can also discard off itself, which is something that other cards of its type did not get to do. So that's a good trait for this one. It's much closer to Chien-Pao in terms of its usability, but Chien-Pao obviously needs a stage 2 setup, but if you do get that setup, it's very easy to just like chain it. This one takes a bit more effort until we get Ogerpon next set, but that's for the future. Right now, you probably need to use stuff like Sandy Shocks, which is restricting not just in deck building, but in like prize count stuff as well. I think there was one deck that used Palkia with this, and I think it was like Palkia as the main attacker or something, and then this was the cyber. I don't know. Didn't really look at the deck too thoroughly, but like you've got a one-time acceleration boost. I struggle to see this being like amazing right now, but it is definitely a very good card to keep an eye out on in the future. We have the Dunsparce in this set, and I do want to mention the Dunsparce itself as well here because it has 0 retreat. Yes, it only has 60 HP, but this is an amazing pivot line in general. We're going to be seeing this out of a couple of decks this time because Pepper is also, like I'm playing one, Pepper's going to be playing another one. So yeah, it's a 0 HP, 0 retreat. Imagine if it had 0 HP, just like bench and knockout. Be very silly. 0 retreat Dunsparce going into the 140 HP to Dunsparce. That part doesn't really matter. Runaway draw is what we want here. You draw 3 cards, and if you drew cards this way, shuffle the Pokemon and all cards attached to it back into the deck. What is really cool about the way that the Dunsparce works here is that if it can be used in the active slot. So if you have Dunsparce active, it's a 0 retreat pivot in its own right, but if you evolve it during the turn, you can draw 3, shuffle it away, now you've got a new Pokemon in the active. So a bunch of different decks could actually use this engine very well. The main difficulty is trying to find the Dunsparce. So I believe you could see stuff like Eraser kind of use this, like Jacques could potentially as well, but their supporter cards a little bit limited that way. Otherwise it's like Ultra Ball or Capturing Aroma, Great Ball maybe. We really don't have good options to search out evolution stuff right now, and that is an issue for this card, but it's not insurmountable, and that draw on demand is really good for dealing with stuff like Iono as well. So very nice card. Relicanth is cool. I'm being told this sees a little bit of play at times. There is an Incineroar we could mention the Prevos for this, but basically it just lets you use your evolution Pokemon's basic form attacks, right? The pre-evolution forms. So a Charizard could use the Charmeleon's attack, for example, which is kind of cool. These sorts of abilities come about all of the time, whether it's in a stadium form or whether it's a basic like this, or even an energy card has done this at times, like tool cards do this a bit as well. There's almost always some form of this that comes around. Most of the time they don't see a lot of play, and the reason they don't see a lot of play is, especially in more recent times, Prevos do not have good attacks that you would want to use. However, there is one exception at the moment, which is the Incineroar line. So I mentioned the Incineroar just now because it's actually kind of cool. It's a 320 HP stage 2 that has an ability that makes its attacks cost 1 colorless less for each of the opponent's bench Pokemon. For 1 fire and 4 colorless, this then does 240 with automatic burn. So 260 in most situations, which is relatively powerful. The pre-evolution for this is a Litten that for 2 fire energy, I'm pretty sure it was, lets you do 20 damage for each damage counter that is on the Incineroar. There's a Torracat as well that has like an inbuilt sort of focus band type effect, but if you're getting one shot with Incineroar EX over here, you're either playing against Chien-Pao or you're in a lot of trouble in the first place. So yeah, the point is, this card is like kind of cool. It was theorized at the start of play, but a lot of people sort of saw through this. I know Joe Bernard Omnipote was like massively against this card, and it's because the opponent can play around it, right? If the opponent doesn't play 4 bench Pokemon down, then your attack is really expensive, and even with Magma Basin, you're still kind of only being able to attach 2 energy. What this did see in play in is as like a 101 line in Charizard, so you could actually use it as the fire attacker that wasn't relying on the opponent taking a bunch of prize cards first. So this could be your early game hit where you do like 260 in the early stages, and then Charizard itself sort of builds in to fill the gaps, if you will, after this goes down. So it does see some play. It's a pretty cool card. Metang is pretty nice. The 100 HP doesn't matter anymore because we lost Level Ball, so it's 100 HP stage 1 that looks at the top 4 cards of your deck once per turn, attaches any number of basic mental energy you find there to your Pokemon in any way that you like, and then it bottom decks the cards that you don't get to attach. This means if you have multiples of this in play, it allows you to dig 8, 12 cards deeper into your deck, finding these energy. So unlike most versions of this sort of power, shuffling the deck does not happen. So if you use these in chain, you're very likely to hit 3-4 energy if you build the deck properly. This revitalizes Dialga V-Star, and is one that I have given to Sai to play this round, because he tried Dialga V-Star before, didn't really work with just metal sources and stuff like that, but this thing can potentially accelerate to a V-Star and get it to do its V-Star attack in a single turn, which is absurd, but it is what it is. There's a 60 HP Beldum that is played in the deck that gives you an attack that lets you top deck a card out of your deck, which is pretty cool, but there is a 70 HP one if you are leery about losing to like Sableye and stuff. But Lost Box is good, but not great at the moment, so it's up to yourself there. There is a Metagross that gets used as well on occasion. I don't think it was used in the tournament decks for the most part, but it is definitely a good consideration, because for 1 metal and 3 colorless energy, Luster Blast does 200 and discards 2 energy from this Pokemon. It's also just a 180 HP Behemoth here as well. This guy is pretty big for a stage 2 like single prizer. And yeah, you could convert an extra Metang into Metagross after you use its ability, because Metang can accelerate to itself, so it's actually surprisingly good. Like, Meteor Mash isn't very great, but it never really has been, so whatever. 200 damage is enough to KO like a lot of bench-sitting things like Rotom, Squawkabilly, Luminion, Mew EX, for example, so there's a lot that you could potentially take 2 prizes on with this guy. Very good. Cinccino revolutionizes the Lugia EX deck, not Lugia EX, Lugia V-Star deck, and I still don't want to play it. For 2 colorless energy, this 110 HP evolution is a stage 1 single prizer, does 70 for each special energy attached to this Pokemon. So yeah, you just play all the colorless special energy stuff you can, and this can do up to 350 damage from a single turn. I think Double Turbo does not work with it because it says special energy card, so you don't want to attach Double Turbo to this thing. You would only do 50 damage for that one, so yeah, don't do that. But if you accelerate 4 energy with Archeops and then attach one from hand, that's 350, KOs everything in one go. So yeah, still sees a 1-1 play to this day, even though the deck is a bit less consistent playing more of it, I think. So very cool. Then we get to the ancient stuff here. Great Tusk is a 140 HP single prizer that for 2 colorless energy, the Double Turbo that's in format, discard the top card of the opponent's deck. If you play an ancient supporter card this turn, discard 3 more. We do have Sada's Vitality, and there is 1 more ancient supporter from this set that we need to go over. So it is possible that this is its own mill deck. That did come up, but yeah, discard 4 is pretty respectable. Giant Tusk is like okay, but very difficult to charge up because you don't play that many basic fighting energy in the deck. You realistically only play like 2, maybe 3 at absolute most. We'll get into the reasons why as we go. Fluttermane is a pretty good card for a couple of different decks, to be honest. It's a 90 HP ancient Pokemon with the Midnight Fluttering ability. If it's in the active spot, the opponent's active has no abilities. So that's kind of cool. It means that you get to stop things like fleet-footed, and if the opponent like leads Miraidon or something, then they have to kind of push this away. Hex Hurl is also okay. This does see some attack play at times. For 3 colorless energy, you do 90 damage, put 2 damage counters on the opponent's bench Pokemon in any way that you like. Not a lot of bench damage, but again, it's a single prizer. It's any energy, which is pretty flexible, means you don't have to play Psychic Energy in the Ancient deck, and yeah, Gardevoir gets to play this as well. Like, you'd think Gardevoir would die because of losing Shining Arcana, but this is one of the many ways that deck completely changes its tone. And yeah, you play 4 of it in the Ancient deck for obvious enough reasons we'll get to in a sec. Sandy Shocks is a 120 HP single prizer that for 1 fighting energy does 20 plus 70 more if you have 3 or more energy in play. It's not affected by weakness, which is a bit of a downside. You would love to be able to hit Miraidon and stuff for weakness with this, but 90 damage for a single energy is very powerful. We've seen this kind of attack on basics like 2 other times so far, the Zapdos and Moltres had done this sort of thing before. Moltres I don't think saw a lot of play, but Zapdos was game warping at its time, and this is an ancient Pokemon, so you can do some fun stuff with that too. Very good at sniping basics in the early game. Roaring Moon is one of the faces of this set, and we're going to see two different decks with this card coming in this set. 140 HP Ancient Pokemon, it is a single prizer, so that's the main sort of draw. And for 2 Darkness Energy, Vengeance Fletchling, very weird attack name. It does 70 plus 10 for each other ancient card that is in your discard pile. So it can ramp to do enough damage to KO EXs and stuff as well. It is nigh on impossible to KO like stage 2 EXs in one hit, but again, you're a single prizer, you can generally afford to trade 1 for 2 on those things. You'd think the 2 Darkness Energy would be too much of a detriment here, but we have, again, Stardust Vitality can accelerate to 2 different ones of these. Dark Patch does exist in the format, and there are a couple of versions of this deck that play it, so that's kind of cool. And yeah, it can scale very well with the other single prize stuff that we have here. Capped off by Koraidon. This 140 HP Dragon type ancient Pokemon takes a fighting and a colorless to do Primordial Beatdown, which does 30 for each of the ancient Pokemon that you have in play. So if you manage to do a full bench, you're going to do 180 damage for a fighting and a darkness energy, basically, because that's the types that the deck plays. Realistically, you're going to have Radgren down, so you're going to generally do 150, but 150 for 2 energy on a single prizer is pretty respectable. This deck has never been like the absolute top of the meta, but it certainly has put in work for a couple of players in various tournaments throughout this last year. It's a pretty cool deck, and this is one that Sai is going to represent this time round. Good stuff. Finally, the last 2 future Pokemon. I think there's a bit of a bug with these in the API where their dex number is not registered properly. That's why they're up here. Miraidon is unfortunately a dragon type. It's 110 HP future dragon with the peak acceleration attack. For any 1 energy, you do 40 damage, search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards, attach them to your future Pokemon in any way that you like. It can attack with Sparking Strike as well, 2 Lightning and a Psychic to do 160. The deck plays 1 Psychic energy for basically this purpose, and for Twin Shottles a little bit, but yeah, this is very cheap, reasonably high-powered acceleration here. With a couple of Iron Crown and the Future Booster Capsule, you can do like 100 damage on the first turn of the game, and remember that the future Pokemon have got Techno Radar. Discard a card from the hand, search your deck for 2 future Pokemon, put them into the hand. That was from the last set. Iron Hands, of course, is also a future Pokemon, and will take advantage of this to no end. Very strong card, to be honest with you. For a slightly different deck for the most part, Iron Leaves is also pretty solid. You can play like a more toolboxy style future deck that uses this, but for the most part, Hands Turbo is the way that this gets played. But this card fits into a few different decks. It's a 220 HP Grass type Pokemon, very important to hit Charizard for weakness, and it has an attack that's like okay, 2 Grass and a colorless to do 180, can't attack next turn. Seems kind of bad, but if you do play it in Future Box, and obviously outside of it too, Rapid Vernier is a really good ability to have. When you play it from the hand to your bench, you may switch it with your active Pokemon and move any number of energy from your other Pokemon to this Pokemon. So if you can get the energy into place, say with Miraidon the previous turn, you can then bench the Iron Leaves, shift the Grass energy that you've accelerated to the Leaves, and attack with Prism Edge immediately. If you then bench another Leaves the next turn, then you could shift the energy from this one to the new one, and, I don't know, Turo Scenario to pick the thing up, or Penny to pick up the Leaves, and just go from there. Pretty solid combination, to be honest. As far as the trainer energy stuff goes here, we have a few A-specs. We'll just talk about the stuff in sequence here. Awakening Drum is an ancient A-spec that draws a card for each of your ancient Pokemon in play. It's debatable whether you play this or Prime Catcher, that we'll get into in just a sec, but a lot of the ancient box decks did actually play this card because it is a very cool one when you think about it. If you put like 4 ancient Pokemon in play, draw 4 on an item is insane, right? So like this card is really good. It's just you can't play other A-specs if you use it. So do you want to use it? Up to yourself. Buddy Buddy Poffin is the replacement for Battle VIP Pass and is a much more palatable replacement for it here. You search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less and put them onto the bench. So this allows you to get your evolving basics, usually, but it doesn't tend to let you get too many other setup stuff, right? Like, you can use it to get Comfey, and you could use it to get like Jirachi or Manaphy, but you can't use it to get Sableye, or Cramorant, or any EX Pokemon. So Squawkabilly is not searchable with this, for example. So yeah, this is a much more balanced version of it, and I am far happier with this card existing, because not every deck can play it, and it's also playable past the first turn. So yeah, much better design. Hand Trimmer is a really dumb control card, and I'm not even sure the control decks play anymore, but it's something that you need to know exists in the format because it is just kind of gross. Each player discards cards from their hand until they have 5 cards in their hand. Opponent does discard first, although I'm not sure how relevant that tends to be. I guess you could tailor what you discard based on what they do, but right. This is like Hue, but there's no draw component to it because it's an item and not a supporter card. I don't know, I don't like this existing, but then again, I'm also just not a fan of control decks in Pokemon, so there you go. Master Ball returns. This means you can play the old Master Ball if you don't like the pink card here, which may or may not be the better way of doing it, I don't know. Search your deck for a Pokemon, reveal it, put it into hand. This didn't see a lot of play the first time round because why would you do this when like Ultra Ball is there, or Computer Search was the big one, but we don't have a Computer Search equivalent this time, and Lugia decks did actually play this card because it does actually do stuff for that deck, right? They have a hard time searching out the exact Pokemon that they need. This card gets them there. So in this set, Lugia did actually play it. It's pretty good. Prime Catcher is a card I have as a League promo in real life at this point because I won it from the last League Cup that I went to, which was pretty cool. Pulled it out of the pack. It's worth like £20 or something, I think, or at least it was. That was kind of fun. This is Guzma on an item card. You switch the opponent's bench Pokemon to the active spot, and if you do, you switch your active Pokemon with one of your bench. It is conditional on, like, the switch is conditional on the Gust, so if you can't Gust, then you can't use this as a switch card, which doesn't come up too often, but it's still kind of sad whenever it does. Yeah, this is the best A-spec, like, by a mile, right? But it's not the only A-spec that is playable, and, like, that's really cool. Not every deck has to play Prime Catcher. There are some archetypes where other cards will work a lot better. And I don't just mean the ancient and the future ones either. We'll talk about the rest of them here. All of these have actually seen play. It's actually kind of fun. I think the only A-spec here that hasn't seen tournament success is the Reboot Pod. And it isn't for lack of trying, it just isn't really that necessary. Reboot Pod attaches a basic energy from your discard pile to each of your future Pokemon. Now you would look at this and you go, well, this is accelerating like 5 energy, 5-6 energy, right? How on earth is this not good? And it isn't that it's a bad card, it's that most of the future Pokemon you're going to have in play don't even really need energy on them, right? This can be really, really good if you're playing the tech box style of future rather than the Iron Hands focus thing, because this could let you accelerate a bunch of grass energy onto those iron crowns, and then your leaves that you bench can absorb those energy later on. So it can be really good, but for the most part, Prime Catcher is just much better. And especially if you're playing the Future Hands version like I will be, Prime Catcher literally just lets you bring up the thing that you can amp to get 2 prizes, or potentially 3 if it's like a Squawkabilly or something. So it just isn't necessary, and it's not as good as Prime Catcher for the deck that it's built for. So that's it really. That's the thing when you have these sorts of cards that you can only play one of any type in a deck, right? The old Pokemon Gold Star were very similar, and like Radiant Pokemon just now, right? Imagine most decks playing anything that isn't Radgren, or maybe Zard if they're playing into that sort of thing instead, right? Most decks will not want to play anything else but those. So it's the same sort of idea, right? Only the absolute best ones end up seeing play. So yeah. I love the two Ancient and Future supporter cards out of this set. Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking is awesome. This card is Mallow, or all the way back it would be Oracle from the Aquapolis set, right? Search your deck for up to 2 cards, shuffle the deck, then put the 2 cards on top of the deck in any order. Works really well with Radiant Greninja and Bibarel and like any other immediate draw sort of thing. Can also just get you 2 lightning energy to the top of the deck for an electric generator, for example. Like, there's so many useful applications for a card like this. The only reason I think it doesn't see more play is just because it is a combo piece. It's like Mallow didn't really see more than like a 1 or 2 of in a bunch of decks. It did see play in a lot of decks, but it didn't really see a ton of play in everything, and this is somewhat similar. So I can understand, but man, I love the fact that this card exists. I'll skip quickly to the Ancient supporter because this one is important for the Ancient box deck. Explorer's Guidance is Hapu from Gen 7. Look at the top 6 of your deck, put 2 into the hand, discard the other ones. It being an Ancient supporter means it fuels Vengeance Fletchling. It discarding 4 cards means it probably fuels Vengeance Fletchling, right? Yeah, really solid card. This sort of thing, and Sada's Vitality drawing cards as well, basically allows the deck to play like almost 30 Ancient cards in the entire deck and still be coherent. There's a really solid game plan there, so strong card for sure. It doesn't see a lot of play in most decks because I think Chorus's Experiment is probably better on the whole. This does let you potentially recover the cards that you don't keep, but it also doesn't keep as many cards. So, like, Chorus looks at 5 and picks up 3 of them, whereas this looks at 6, sure, but you only get to keep 2. And I think for the most part, a lot of decks don't really want that right now. But I love this card. I've always loved this sort of effect, right? Sage's Training was a 4 of in like every one of my decks in Heart Gold Soul Silver. So yeah, this card is really cool. A bit less cool is the supporter in the middle. Unfortunately, they did Airy Dirty here. Like, you would think she'd have some sort of offense boost or whatnot. But no, it's a control card. The opponent reveals their hand and you discard up to 2 item cards you find there. Very nasty against the A-Specs if the opponent's just holding it. But yeah, I hate this card existing, to be honest. Not only control decks play this, but it is largely a control tool, and it's a really nasty one at that. You'd think, well, you could just play your items out and that'd be great, right? But most of the time you want to have at least some starting play for the following turn. You don't want to just blow your entire item plat in a single turn unless you know that you're up against item lock, right? So yeah, bit of a lame card in my opinion. On to the tool cards. Heavy Baton is a pretty solid one if this is attached to a Pokemon which is exactly 4 within its retreat cost. It's in the active spot and gets KO'd by damage from the opponent's attack. You move up to 3 basic energy from that Pokemon to the bench in any way that you like. This is a more restricted but upgraded version of Gen 7's Wishful Baton, which worked on any Pokemon, but it had to move all the energy to a single target, as opposed to any way that you like. This is used as a 2-of in the Future Hands deck, because of course Iron Hands has got exactly 4 in its retreat cost, so you accelerate to 1 hands, you put the baton on that hands, and then any energy that's there, once you get KO'd, you will shift it to the benched ones, and you'll still be able to continue using that expensive 4 energy amp as much as you need to. Really good card in that deck. Kind of useless everywhere else, I'll be honest with you. There aren't very many good Pokemon with a retreat cost of 4 right now. Most of them are 2, but in the one deck it's good in, oh man is it good. Hero's Cape is an A-Spec tool. that gives your Pokemon 100 extra HP. I keep joking to Pepper that one of these days I'm going to make him change the damage counters so that there's like 500 HP total, because this actually does allow a couple of the bulkiest Pokemon to break the current damage cap of 400 that's on those things. We obviously couldn't have known that was the way the game was going when we were fixing up those things in the first place. I just think it's very funny. Yeah, put this on the stage 2 and it gets up to like 440 HP potentially. Utterly ridiculous. Also just used in a bunch of different decks though, because this kind of makes you effectively have like an EX when you're not an EX, right? Without giving up the EX stuff. Like Luxurious Cape does the same HP total on non-EXs, but it does make them give up an extra prize card. This just kind of doesn't, so very fun card. Like normally these sorts of tools might not be as useful, but tool removal right now, like we only have Lost Vacuum, and next set Jamming Tower, but that's playable, like you can play around that too, so yeah, fun stuff. Maximum Belts is the Choice Belt equivalent here, but it's an Ace spec this time. EX Pokemon take 50 more damage from the attacks of the Pokemon that this is attached to. It is only on the active Pokemon, you can't do extra spread damage with this, but like that's standard fare for this sort of thing. Some decks that hit 280 specifically will use this card because it lets them break Charizard. Because Charizard's at 330 HP, right? So this lets them beat Charizard when their output is capped at 280. Think Giratina is a decent example of a deck that could use this. I think Arctina might actually end up using this over Prime Catcher sometimes, because of that exact trait. Cool card. Rescue Board is the most recent of the escape board style things. It's still got the rockets on its back, so that's always fun. You pay 1 less to retreat the Pokemon that this card is attached to, but if that Pokemon has got 30 or less HP remaining, you don't have any retreat cost. That last part doesn't come up very often, but is still pretty fun and might end up saving you some hassle at some points. Yeah, this is used in Lost Box quite a lot as escape board, like the old sort of it wasn't a skateboard, it was float air balloon, right? That was the one that we had in format at the time. That got used a reasonable bit as well for the same sort of thing. And yeah, just being able to pay 1 less to retreat, a lot of decks will enjoy having that sort of thing around. I think the average retreat is 2 at the moment though, so there are an equal number of decks that don't care, but you know, still a cool card. Finally, the 2 energy here. Mist Energy is fantastic. This is like the old wash water energy, where it provides a colorless energy, but it also prevents additional effects from happening on the Pokemon this is attached to. Even decks like Charizard will sometimes use this, even though it cannot actually power Charizard's attack. They will use it as an additional attachment, just so that they can't get one-shot by like Roaring Moon, for example, or just basically any other extra effects. Mist Energy also messes with damage counter placing things, like the Fluttermane from above, but also Dragapult next set. It's really potent actually. Like, direct damage does tend to be the most common thing you'll see, obviously, but a lot of extra stuff just does like additional effect things. Like even the Incineroar, for example, you can't get burned, right? Because it's an additional effect of an attack. So yeah, cool stuff. And then finally, Neo Upper Energy. This didn't see a ton of play, but I believe early Dragapult list next set actually did use this card. If it's attached to a stage 2, it provides a double rainbow energy, but otherwise it provides a single colorless energy. Now of course it is an A spec, so it's the weakest of them. As a result, it's like you really have to have a very strong reason to use this, but dragon types in general would have a good reason to use this. It's just we don't really have a good stage 2 dragon type at the moment. Until next set, so yeah. Finally, let's briefly go over a bunch of these ones. I think I'll mention a couple of things when that I think are like good, but just maybe not like amazing meta picks right now. For the most part, this is stuff I think would like go well in draft more than anything. So yeah, Gengar EX combines well with the Gengar from Paldean Fates that lets you switch once per turn. It's in the same line, so it's like not too bad. If the opponent attaches an energy from their hand to one of their Pokemon, put 2 damage counters on it per Gengar EX you have in play. That's kind of fun. And then for 2 Darkness Energy, you do 160 damage, and you can move an energy from the opponent's active to their bench. The idea then, of course, being that A, you're stranding that energy on something that doesn't want it, but B, you're forcing them to attach another energy to the active, take an extra 20 damage or so. It's fine. I just kind of think that it's neat to have a inbuilt, like, dual line here, so that's why I think the Gengar is cool. Same thing for Scizor here. This is a 270 HP EX that already has a decent non-EX that you might well play if you know the format has just gone super ability heavy. And for 2 Metal Energy, you discard up to 2 Metal from this Pokemon and do 120 damage for each card that you discarded this way. In Draft, you would not have access to Dialga V-Star, so this might be the replacement in Metang decks. Like if you manage to pull enough Metang to play the deck, then you could use this alongside Metagross as your main attackers, which would be pretty cool. Possibly Zacian too, because that did a reasonable amount of damage on the single prizer. Feraligatr suffers from being a stage 2 non-EX, and it takes 2 energy to attack. That's literally the only problem with this. This card is insane otherwise. 180 HP, but realistically it's 130 because of its ability. You put 5 damage counters on this thing once per turn, and if you do an additional 120 damage that turn to the opponent's active. Its attack for 2 water does 160 and cannot be used in consecutive turns. Unbelievable, to be honest. It does 280 on a single prizer for just 2 energy, and it's like completely useless in standard because it just is too hard to consistently chain this, right? But in Draft there is a potential for it. Farigiraf is disgusting against specifically basic EX decks, but next set there's like several basic EX almost only decks, so there you go. It's a 260 HP Terra Dark Pokemon that for 1 Psychic and 2 colors does 160 and snipes 30, but Armor Tail is the main thing here, prevents all damage done to it by attacks from the opponent's basic EX Pokemon. Yeah. It's basically just supposed to be a big, you know, like middle finger sort of Pokemon. And it's cool, but I don't know. Torterra is better later when we get Area 0 Underdepths. For now, its attack power just isn't quite there. It's a gargantuan 340 HP EX. The 2 disadvantages to this is that Turtwigs have more than 70 HP, so you can't Poffin them, which is annoying, and also that it only does damage for each grass Pokemon you have in play. It does only take 1 grass energy, which is cool, but it caps out at 180 right now, which again, to be fair, enough to one-shot Charizard, but that means that you can't play Radgren right now, because if you do, that's not a grass Pokemon, so your damage cap is too low to one-shot Charizard. When we get access to Area 0 Underdepths, this is a card you can explore again, because we have 2 good single-stage parts to this as well. There's a Grotle from the... is it like Brilliant? It's either Brilliant Stars or Astral Radiance. I think it's Astral Radiance, I forget exactly, but there's a Grotle that lets you search your deck for a grass Pokemon once per turn, and the Torterra from there takes an additional energy, but does 50 for each of your evolution Pokemon in play, and that's a 190 HP single prizer, so you would have even more potential damage output there. It's kind of absurd. Yeah, also Ogerpon and a lot of grass support comes out next set that makes this much better if you can have 9 Pokemon in play, because 270 for a single grass energy would be nuts. Bronzong doesn't look like much initially, but is very irritating against decks like Charizard and potentially Baxcalibur. For a single Psychic Energy, this 110 HP single price Psychic Pokemon does 30 and prevents the opponent from evolving from hand next turn. Yeah, some decks just lose to this automatically, right? Because they need to evolve like Gardevoir or potentially Charizard. You just basically don't get to play the game. The only reason this is even considerable is because of the Salvatore supporter card here. This is Wally, but for non-ability Pokemon. Search your deck for a card that has no abilities and evolves from one of your Pokemon. Put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it. You can use it instantly, basically. You can use it during the first turn or on a Pokemon that was played in that turn. Cheats the standard evolution rules, in other words. Yeah, this is particularly good for Banette, Venomoth, and the Bronzong up here, because they all have single energy attacks that are low damage but very disruptive. Is that good enough? No, but it is very annoying, and item lock especially might be the better way for it, but yeah, some people theorize this with it too. I could understand it, to be honest. Victini has got Flippity Flap. That's mostly it. Shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 6 cards. On a single prizer for any energy, if you still need that kind of effect in your deck, it's pretty good. Sinjoff could be okay if you know that you're up against special energy, but that's not particularly common in this generation, outside of like exactly Lugia, which we wouldn't have in draft, so I don't know. Drillbur, please play Garchomp. For the love of God, it would be funny. When you bench this from hand, you discard up to 3 basic fighting energy from your deck. So the idea, of course, is then Garchomp can accelerate all of those out of the discard to your Pokemon in any way that you like. Would be really cool if Garchomp did like damage, you know. 160 for 1 is good, but not good enough, sort of thing, you know. So yeah, unfortunately, doesn't really have a home at the moment. Colossal would be a really good reversal energy target in draft. Gatling Tar does 40 for a fighting energy, but it does 80 more for each fire energy, attached to this Pokemon. So reversal energy would be 3 fire energy, so it would do 280 damage in one shot. Very, very good in that aspect, but it is a stage 2 attacker that does not have a support like stuff around it, so gotta be careful. I forget what HPs the Roly-Colies have though, because this isn't the first Colossal, I don't think, in Gen 9. So I'd have to check what the Roly-Colies HPs are. Maybe you could pop in them, and that'd be kind of nice. Bramblegast is very, very silly. This card starts with 100 HP, but its ability grants it 50 more HP for each prize card the opponent has taken. It then does variable amount of damage with powerful needles. For a grass and 2 colors, you flip for each energy that's on this Pokemon and do 80 damage per the number of heads. The idea with this would be to use it with Fortress EX, which did get a reprint in Paldea and Fate, so you could potentially go down that route too. You try and make it so the opponent, you like KO 2 Fories, get like 10 energy in play between 2 Bramblegast, and just try and KO the opponent with like a 300 and a 350 HP Bramblegast. Potentially with a Hero's Cape, so you can end up having 450. Mahone's got a video of this on his channel, it's very funny, but not very good, I would say, but hilarious if you actually get it to pull off. Rabska is much better for draft than it is for the real game, because it's a stage 1 and we have Manaphy in the real game, but we don't in draft, and this is our bench barrier. We prevent all damage from and effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to your bench Pokemon. This will not stop Twin Shottles, however, so Future Box still has a way around it. But this is really powerful for draft if bench damage is really that much of an issue, because we don't have a better way around it. Wugtrio EX is a very silly card to go alongside the Goldengo from the previous set. You have a 250 HP Lightning type Terra Pokemon that for a single water energy discards up to 3 energy cards from your hand and snipes 60 for each one that you discarded. So yeah, pretty good snipe move. It is on a very frail EX though, and it is in water, so you probably need to like split energy slightly. Like you can discard non-water energy, but you do need to start with a water energy on here. And we do not have Palkia V-Star in our draft format, obviously, because it would be Scarlet Violet bit on, right? So we don't have access to that part, so I don't know if it would be good enough. But hey, if you want to try it, it would be a fun draft deck to play. There's a bunch of Paradox mons I think are pretty good for drafting stuff as well. This Great Tusk has 140 HP, and for a fighting and 2 colorless does 80, and if your bench Pokemon have any damage counters on them, it does 80 more damage. So yeah, 160 for free energy that hits fighting weakness. Miraidon and other lightning type stuff is probably still really powerful in draft, like Scarlet Violet on. So I could see this being really useful. Like, you're playing fighting anyway because of Koraidon, right? So if you've got enough stuff to do that deck, it's pretty good. Iron Treads is a curious one. If you have the stuff for Future Box, the 2 weaknessing might be useful. It's a 130 HP metal type, but if it has a future booster capsule on it, it's fighting type as well. So decent for hitting weaknesses, but its attack is really weak, so you would need to draft the crowns as well. For a metal and a colors, you do 60, and move an energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. Like, that's not even an optional move. That sort of attack can actually be pretty good. Think like Y-Cyclone from Yveltal EX way back in Gen 6, right? The move and energy part was actually one of the best parts about that card. So it definitely can be useful, but it needs to hit for weakness, and honestly, it's probably too weak unless you have like 3 Iron Crowns in the draft, and that just seems very unlikely, right? So, I don't know. Iron Hands is a 140 HP basic lightning Futuremon that, I mean, Volt Wave is like okay, but it takes 2 energy, so probably not. Super Alloy Hands is what we care about here. For 2 lightning and the colorless, it does 80, but you double that to 160 if the opponent is an EX or V Pokemon. So, pretty good. 160 with the future boosters, 180 with like 1 hands, it's 200, 1 crown, it's 200. It is a lightning Pokemon, it's not a fighting type, so you do get to electric generator to this as well. So if you have at least a borderline playable future deck, like if you get a couple of the Miraidon and you maybe have 1 Iron Hands or something, you could probably use this. It's pretty solid. Iron Jugulus is a colorless Pokemon still, is not a Dark type, which is kind of weird by this point. This is the second printing after all. I don't know. It's 110 for 3 colors, not amazing, but it is any energy, so you could use this in any form of future deck, which is kind of cool. And Automated Combat will do 30 damage, put 3 damage counters on any attacking Pokemon that damages this card. So it's a reasonable lead. It can do an okay amount of solid damage itself, like you can accelerate towards it and stuff. Again, debatable whether or not it's like actually good, but it could be fine. I think the previous one is better, however, especially with the next card that I want to mention, the Iron Valiant here. This card, for a single Psychic Energy, does 20 and snipes 20 to one of the opponent's bench Pokemon. The previous Iron Jugulus for 3 colorless energy did 50 to 3 of the opponent's Pokemon that had damage counters on them. So this is a really good way of like sniping damage around a little bit. If you have maybe 1 Iron Valiant EX and you can switch between the stuff a little bit, you could really do a lot of spread damage with this deck, and that's kind of cool. Zenblade is like fine, but nothing too special. The other Iron Valiant is a lot better for Gardevoir based decks. Calculation is like decent as well. You get to rearrange the top 4 cards of your deck for a single Psychic Energy. That's kind of cool. But the Majestic Sword is the main thing here. If you have played a Future Supporter from your hand during this turn, for 2 Psychic and a colorless, you do 100 plus 100 more damage. So yeah, if you've got like Turo Scenario and the Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking, like, Code Breaking is pretty reasonable for a deck like Gardevoir to use, because it can set up your next turn, then do 200 with this thing. That's a decent swing, like, on a basic Pokemon. It's not bad, so I could maybe see it being played there. Then we have Koraidon EX. This is a Dragon-type Ancient EX, with 2 pretty okay attacks. Kaiser Tackle is the one I'd see most use for the Ancient decks in draft. For a fire and 2 fighting energy, it does 280 damage, but it does do 60 to itself as well. There are enough fighting type EX, Ancient stuff even, that you could do that I think this card could be pretty reasonable for that, but in standard play, it doesn't play well with Roaring Moon, so if your deck is based on Roaring Moon, you probably don't want to play this card. Retribution Strike is like okay, it synergizes relatively well with Kaiser Tackle. For 2 colorless energy, it does 20 plus 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon, so if it doesn't die on the following turn, and Ancient Booster Capsule puts it to 290 HP, so maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't die, then you can get a really strong final hit as well, so that's kind of cool. But I just think, like, if you've got, say, Sandy Shocks and maybe Sliverwing and stuff like that, you could definitely make Kaiser Tackle do a lot of damage here, and like, that in draft is probably enough to KO a ton of decks, so yeah. Miraidon EX is a dragon type with 220 HP, it is a future one this time, and both of its attacks take Psychic and Lightning Energy, which is really rough to be honest. But in draft, it could be pretty solid, because Repulsion Bolt is strong. For that Lightning Psychic cost, you do 60, but you do 100 more damage if the opponent already has damage counters on them. That Iron Valiant spread starts to become a lot more reasonable at this point. Cyber Drive for an extra colorless on that attack cost does 220 and cannot be used in consecutive turns, but you can go back to using Repulsion Bolt. One of the cool things about this is that it doesn't have a weakness. That's the one benefit of being dragon types on these things. No weakness means that you can't get KO'd by the regular fighting type stuff that would typically dunk on the rest of the deck as a whole, but the disadvantage is that you can't use Electric Generator, so difficult card to play, but it's still got a really strong base attack and Future Booster and, you know, all the fun stuff that way. Cyber Drive could hit up to 280 damage quite easily if you have the real estate to go around it, so if you pull it in draft, you're playing it for sure. Finally, on the Pokemon front, Walking Wake is a card that's like close to being good, but just doesn't really fit with any of the ancient stuff that we have, to be honest. It's a 220 HP water type ancient Pokemon, like the only ancient Pokemon that's a water type, and, well, it's okay. Damage from its attacks are unaffected by the effects of the opponent's active Pokemon. No Mimikyu against this thing is a good example, but yeah, no damage reduction stuff either. If the opponent's got like take 50 less damage or something, then it just ignores that, which is pretty cool. Catharsis Roar is an awesome attack name. For a water and 2 colorless, it does 120, but you double that to 240 if the opponent is affected by a special condition. You can see immediately why I like this card, because I always love this sort of special condition manipulation stuff. Usually it's in like do you know, 50, 70, 90 damage per special condition that's on the opponent, but this time it's just if they're affected by one, do 240. You get to use Brute Bonnet with this, which is the cool thing, but it's just a little bit convoluted. Getting the energy on is a bit awkward, and its typing doesn't play with any other ancient card, so a bit of a shame. Morty's Conviction is the trainer card that I think probably could have been in the main lot. You have to discard one of a card from the hand to play this, but then you draw a card for each of the opponent's bench Pokemon. There aren't many decks that would play this over Iono or Research, but there are a couple, and Pepper is going to be playing one of them in this round, so that's kind of cool. It's very similar to Zinnia's Resolve, but you discard one fewer card and draw one fewer as well, because it doesn't count the opponent's active like Zinnia does. But discard 1, draw 5, still a pretty powerful effect, so not bad. Finally, the 2 stadium cards I have left down here. Full Metal Lab makes metal Pokemon take 30 less damage from the opponent's attacks. Kinda cool, but it's a passive stadium, it's very easy to just rebuff this, and so it doesn't really see a lot of play, but cool effect nonetheless. And finally, Perilous Jungle is interesting. During Pokemon Checkup, put 2 more damage counters on each poisoned, non-darkness Pokemon. This is Viridian City with a bit of a restriction this time. Keep in mind that poison types are now dark Pokemon, like they have been since the start of Gen 8, so that's why it's like it doesn't work on your own poison stuff. Or you can still poison them in the game, but you know, flavor fail, whatever. This card is kind of cool. If you combine this with Radiant Sneasler, then you get 5 extra damage counters from like a basic poison effect, which is pretty solid, but it just doesn't really have a home, is the thing. Like, yes, Brute Bonnet, Ancient Capsule is fun, but it's not particularly good. and there really aren't any other decks that can like apply poison that makes sense, right? But what this is very good for in draft is Paldean Clodsire EX, where Clodsire can poison the opponent if there's a stadium in play. So if you're trying to use that already, and I have mentioned a couple of times, I think that's a kind of cool deck to sort of look at. This card gives you an extra basically 30 damage every turn and stuff, which is potentially really good in draft formats. So yeah. Overall, very strong set. A ton of cards to talk about here, and honestly it's fun to not just have like 50 off meta cards this time round, right? In comparison, a lot of the cards in the set are actually playable in the standard format, which is a bit of a surprise compared to some of the previous sets that we've had, right? So I like it. I think there's a lot of decent stuff here. Unfortunately, Roly Coly over here has got 80 HP. I thought I'd check that on the way out. Maybe there's a 70 HP one that released before. I don't know. Probably makes this Colossal a lot worse for draft than I hoped it would be then. But I'm sure somebody could make it work. Thank you very much for listening. If you have made it this far, you are absolutely awesome. And yeah, next time, well, there's a few funny things to come out of this set, and we will go over them as we play the games. But until then, take care.